Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. I'm your host, Colin. I'm going to be walking you through some Figma and Claude Code stuff today. We're going to get started in probably about 2 minutes, just to give folks a chance to join. But while we're waiting, I would love to know just in the chat if you've already tried to use the Figma MCP. Um, so yeah, just go ahead and throw it in the chat, yes or no, and it'll give me a good idea about like where you guys are at. We're going to be covering obviously like the basics a little bit. So I'll just explain a little bit about what the Figma MCP is, how you can use it to convert designs from Figma to, code basically, and then also vice versa, actually, if you're interested in that, from code back to Figma. But then I'm also going to be covering some of like the edges, I would say, like where things kind of don't work super well, how you can get it to work a little bit better, why Claude Code actually is a really great tool for this. It's not tied specifically to Claude Code in terms of conversion, but I'll talk a little bit about, why we're using Claude Code and yeah, all that good stuff. So again, we'll get started in 1 minute here. Just kind of like, I guess, rules for as we're going here. One thing, if you can keep yourself on mute, that would be great. If you come off of mute, I'm gonna have to probably mute you myself. So I'm gonna interrupt myself to go do that, and then also have to interrupt you. If you want to chat, that's totally cool with me. So just put your hand up if you have a question, and then I'll call on you, and you can come off of mute. But otherwise, just so we don't have any background noise or anything like that. Second thing is, if there's any links in the chat, I mean, I can see a couple so far. That's not for me, so I'm just going to delete these. But just FYI that people obviously join to promote stuff as they want to. So I'll do my best to keep on top of that, but just a heads up. Cool. Alrighty, so we'll go ahead and get started. We have a good size here. So just before I kind of share my screen here, I just want to give a quick thesis about like why I'm even talking about this. So a few months ago, there's been like a lot of work around conversion from design to code. Obviously, like I'm sure you've seen on like LinkedIn and Twitter and other places or X, that like PMs and designers at some companies are shipping to production now, right? Like there's kind of this whole thing going on in the product and design space in terms of moving more towards like code-based solutions and less from like vector designs or from Figma-based solutions. But obviously, like tons of teams have put a ton of time and effort into building Figma design systems, into getting the designs into Figma. And I mean, I'm sure if you've used the tools at all, like it can be kind of frustrating to get an AI to do what you want sometimes, where in Figma you can just like drag the thing or change a property and it just works. And so we're kind of like, I would say, in an in-between spot right now, just globally where there is this kind of movement towards using code-based solutions, but they're not quite good enough in a lot of respects. And so that's where the Figma MCP comes in. It's basically a way to try to take your content from Figma and convert it over into code. But there's a lot of things, like I said, kind of like rough edges on it that we'll talk about today. There's ways to make it better, and a lot of it actually depends on the context that you include. So it's not just using the MCP. What matters a lot is like where you kind of use the MCP. But today, what we're going to do is we're going to go through in the next 30 minutes or so using Claude Code specifically to convert designs from Figma over to code. So we're going to go through, the basics of using Claude Code, the basics of the Figma MCP server. I'll also show you converting with like, I'm going to call it a naive approach or a basic approach, like kind of just giving it to Claude Code and saying, do your best. And then I'll show you a more advanced approach where we actually put some time and effort into doing it properly. And then if we have time, I don't know if we will, I will also show you converting back over to Figma. So we make some changes, for example, in the prototyping tool, we can kind of go back into Figma afterwards if we want to. And then obviously, I'll just mention this at the top here, and I'll also mention it at the end. I teach a course on Maven. It's had, I think, almost 1,000 people come through it now. 200 plus reviews. I think it's at a 4.6 or a 4.7 on AI prototyping specifically. And I've been doing this for like a year and a half now. And I spent a ton of time on like testing out these different workflows. So yeah, you're in good hands on this specific one. But if you're interested in going deeper, then that's a good resource as well. But cool. So we'll go ahead and get into it. Let me share my screen here. And we'll get going. By the way, Zoom changed their UI, so if it seems like I don't know what I'm doing at times, that's why they changed where all the buttons are. So sorry about that. But cool. So this is our agenda for today. So we're going to be talking obviously about Figma MCP, how do we use it, using Claude Code, and then we'll go through the rest of kind of what I talked about. So we're just going to hop right in. We're going to go right over to Figma and continue on from here. So, just in case you're unfamiliar entirely with what MCP is, you're going to notice that over on the right-hand side, if I click on this, we can see that the little word MCP is on the right-hand side. MCP is basically a technology. That's the best way to put it. It's like a translation layer. So it allows AI agents, so tools like Codex from OpenAI, or ChatGPT, as well as Claude and Claude Code, like all that kind of ecosystem of tools, Cursor. It allows those tools, AI agents, to go out and talk to other products. So there's MCP servers for a bunch of products now, right? Like Notion has one that I use all the time. So basically, if I'm working with Claude, I can say, "Hey, add this to my Notion," and it can go and talk to Notion directly. Atlassian has one for like Jira, so if you want to, you can pull out all your Jira tickets automatically. Amplitude has one for product analytics, so you can ask Claude to like look at all my user data and figure out, why your retention is worse now than it was before. So that's what MCP is, just contextually. It is literally just a translation layer or a way for AI agents to talk to other tools. Figma has shipped an MCP server. It's been around for a while now, so probably about a year, I think in total, maybe 8 months. But re recently they made a lot of updates to the MCP server, so that's why we're talking today. So in general, if you want to use the MCP server, basically what you do, you do have to have like the full seat on Figma. So if you don't have the full seat or you don't have dev mode, basically, you're going to need to upgrade your Figma seat. But assuming you have that, you'd go over to whatever design you have. So we're going to kind of play with this design today, which is just a little dashboard. You'd select a design, and then over on the right side, we go into dev mode, and you'll see on the right-hand side here, we can see that the MCP is available there. You do also have to connect the MCP to the other tool, right? So this is basically telling me that the MCP is ready to go inside of Figma. The other side of this is adding the MCP over in your AI editor of choice. So again, the common ones are going to be like Claude Code or Cursor. By the way, as I'm going, you can feel free to drop questions in the chat, and I'm going to check in every like 5 to 10 minutes and try to answer those as we go along. Cool. So that's the basics, right? We have our selection here of the UI, and we do need to make sure that over in Claude that we have the MCP enabled. So I've already done this so that we can save a little bit of time. But just to show you here, if I pop this up and I go slash, well, you can see if I go slash here, you can see a bunch of different commands here, and a bunch of these commands come from MCP. So for example, all these little Figma ones down here come from the MCP. Depending on what tool you're using, and what I mean by that is if you're using the desktop Claude Code or you're using Claude Code into your terminal, setting up the MCP server is going to look a little bit differently. And what I'll do actually, I'll just send out a link afterwards with directions on like how to do this. But if I just flip over quickly to the terminal-based one, let me just clear this and hit slash MCP. You'll see that it loads the MCP servers that I would have connected here. So again, it looks a little bit differently depending on how you have it set up inside the terminal versus inside the desktop application. And today we're going to be using the desktop application primarily, and you'll see why in a second here. But you can see I have a bunch of different MCP servers connected here. Cool. So just to go over that one more time, basically, let me open up Figma one more time. We have our MCP server inside of Figma, right? So that's basically the Figma side. And then we do need to connect it over to Claude Code in order to kind of bridge the two together. All right, so assuming that we've done this, it really is as simple as technically just copying this example prompt. So you can see it's going to give me this prompt here, implement this design from Figma, and I copy it. I go over into Claude, and you can see that I currently am in Claude Code. So you have three different modes if you're using Claude Desktop, right? Chat, Cowork, and Code. And we're going to be using Claude Code here to do this implementation. I did set up a basic project for myself already, and this is the type of thing, again, like I only have 30 minutes. I would cover this in the course in more detail. But before I actually implement the Figma design, I'm just going to run this in the preview so that you can see what this basic project looks like. And it literally just says hello world. It's basically just literally just a little web server that's running that I can preview on the right-hand side. All right, and then finally, kind of moment of truth here, what we should be able to do is paste this in and say implement this design from Figma. And if everything's working correctly, what you're going to see is a bunch of tool calls. So basically what a tool call is it's when Claude Code is reaching out to Figma to try to extract information from Figma, right? So you can see right now it's launching this skill here, and then it's going to go grab the design context and screenshot from Figma. It's running all these different steps. So getting the screenshot, trying to get the design context. You can see it's exporting out a bunch of images, for example, assets, right? Over to Claude Code. It's grabbing a screenshot. It's basically just going through everything it can to learn about the Figma design in order to implement this for us. And so this will take a minute, obviously, for it to run through. So I'm just going to pause for a second and grab questions while we wait. All right. So let's just go through kind of one at a time. So should a dev know Figma now and should be able to edit designs? I would say no. I don't think like that's a worthwhile use of a developer's time. So typically what it would be is like a designer or perhaps a PM has implemented something in Figma, and then you want to convert that over and get it shipped in production. In the past, obviously, what that would look like is like trying to basically match it manually, honestly, right? So like you'd go through and you'd kind of look back and forth. Figma has had some dev tools for a while, so you used to be able to like copy the CSS, right? For example, from Figma. But honestly, it wasn't that useful because most teams have custom styling inside their application anyway. And so you basically just go back and forth and try your best to match it. And usually it didn't match entirely. There was like slightly different, but good enough. And if there's any designers on the call, you'd kind of get frustrated when something's close but not quite right. You're like, whatever, it's 80% of the way there, good enough. And so you kind of let it go. So the whole point of this is to one, like obviously speed up that handoff. So like if you have a design inside of Figma, you can just like your engineer or yourself, if you want to just prototype it, like how it might feel to play with that actual product just drop it inside of here, and you can build a prototype and actually use the thing that's been designed inside of Figma rather than just looking at the mock in Figma. So yeah, primarily focused on PM or designers and then kind of PMs as well. And I'll take a look at the implementation here in a second. I'm just going to grab a couple more questions. Do designers prefer Claude Code or Cursor? I would say I would say generally right now there is a large kind of cultural movement, let's say, towards Claude Code. I'm sure you've seen it on the internet. Everybody's talking about Claude Code. Um, I think it remains to be seen if like that's true indefinitely. So I think definitely Anthropic is having a moment right now, and they're leveraging it for sure. So a lot of people are using and interested in Claude Code. Um, Yeah, unfortunately, like, I don't really have the time to go through like every step of connecting the Figma MCP server, but if I have time towards the end, I'll go back to that specific step. But you can just read the documentation and it's pretty straightforward. Cool. All right, another great question. Do I have a Figma skill or am I just using the MCP? So this is a really great question. You can see up here in this implementation as it's continuing to run through, it says that it used a skill and it launched a skill called Figma Implement Design. This skill actually comes from Figma themselves. So it's part of the MCP server that when you use the MCP server provides both the skill as well as the kind of like raw data or the connection. So you don't have to build your own skill necessarily. The MCP server itself that Figma provides comes with these skills. And so it did use a skill. And for anyone who doesn't know, a skill is basically just a collection of prompts that is pre-written. So rather than us trying to figure out like the best way to use the Figma context, Figma themselves have already written documentation that our Claude Code agent here read and then used in order to implement this design. So we did use a skill, but we didn't actually have to do anything for that to happen. It kind of just happened automatically. All right, cool. I'm going to take a pause on the questions here, and we're going to hop back into what we have in terms of our implementation. So we'll take a look really quick. A couple of things I want to highlight. So one, I already mentioned this, but I'm using the Claude Code desktop app. There's actually a specific reason for this. So I briefly previewed the terminal one, and you can use either, whichever you prefer. The desktop app is better for some cases. One case is that it's a lot easier to get set up and running for like non-technical folks. So basically, you just hop into the Claude desktop app, you go to code, and you can kind of continue forward the same way you saw me do it here. You get the live preview inside of the application rather than having to flip back and forth between your browser. And then the last thing, and really kind of critical, is that Claude Code itself actually has context on this page here. So it can take screenshots automatically when you're using it inside the desktop app. It can like look at the logs. So if there's any errors, for example, it can retrieve those logs automatically and so on. So it basically just gives you like a better environment for Claude to have context on what's happening with your implementation. And so I'd recommend doing it inside the desktop app, unless you want to take the more technical approach and move over to the terminal. But they're really not that different in terms of like the outputs, and they are a little bit different in terms of the usability or the user experience. So yeah. But cool. So we have our design here. I'm just going to flip back and forth really quick between the two so we can try to compare visually. So it's, not going to be a perfect science, but this is our prototype or our mock, right? And then this is what we have implemented in our code. And I would say it's pretty good. Like, I don't know. I'm not a designer, so there's probably some things wrong here that I don't see, but it's like 95% the same, 98% the same. So pretty good in terms of the quality. So yeah, any thoughts, questions so far? We went through like the basic workflow already, right? So we have our Figma design on MCP, we connected it to Claude Code, we dropped it in, we've implemented a prototype. From here, obviously, I could just put in additional prompts. Like I could say, you know, make another page or do whatever. And the very cool thing about this is that it's going to continue to do that in my design system. And this is like one of the critical things that people struggle with is getting their prototypes to look like their product. But because I have this initial setup page here, if I was to prompt it again for something else, it would continue down the path of using, the same components, the same design, and making it really look like my product. And so this is one of the reasons why Claude Code is a useful tool for prototyping. All right, I'm going to scroll to the bottom because you guys probably asked questions relevant to what I asked you a second ago. So let's see here. So how do you stitch one page to another for navigation? You know what, let's just do it for fun really quick. So why don't we say, can you add a new page that shows a data visualization matching my existing styles or components? Right, so now I'm just prompting. I'm not talking to it about Figma at all. I'm just prompting the same way that you'd prompt on anything else. But I started with the Figma context, right? So that's pretty much it. To answer your question, like you would just, prompt away the way that you normally would. Um, cool. And then, yeah, so there was a question here. If you were to play with it, do I need to set up different states for CTAs and buttons and so on? So yeah, this is code. So like if I click on this stuff, it all works, right? There's not much implemented here because I only gave it the one page. But like, whatever buttons or interactions you want to add, animations, at this point in time, like it is code. So you can do anything you want with it. This is the only interaction we actually have on this page right now. There's these three tabs. But, technically we can continue on as much as we wanted to from here. And then, yeah, this is a React application typically. But again, one of the nice things about Claude Code compared to some other tools is Claude Code is not opinionated on the implementation side of this. So like if you were working with Vue or Angular or any other framework, Claude Code would be able to implement that for you, right? And then there was one other question that I want to get to, which is this useful to engineers? Which is a really critical question and what we're going to kind of talk about next. I'm actually just going to cancel out of this here to save us a little bit of time. Uh, Yeah. Okay. So, is this useful to engineers? The short answer is kind of not really, um, because what we've done here is we've spun up a prototype. We could show this to our engineer and say like, hey, look what I made. This is how I want it to work, like as a communication device, basically, right? But from a code perspective, this is not that useful because this code has no context on our code base, right? So, for example, everything here has been re-implemented. Like this table is a new table. It's not the existing table we had in our code base. These, whatever we want to call them, cards, these are not the same cards we already had in our code base. We probably already had a card component. We're not reusing that card component, right? We're rebuilding everything from scratch. And so the problem here is if you were to give this to an engineer, they'd basically say like, thanks, but they have to re-implement the entire thing. Even though this is code, they still have to re-implement the whole thing because you can kind of think about it like it's speaking two different languages. It doesn't have any context on your product, on your code base, on how things work today. And so that's where we're going to move on to our more advanced workflow. So we're going to hop over here and I'm just going to I'm going to close this guy 1 second here. And we're going to preview my more advanced one. And we should just see that we have a playground. Yeah, so same idea here. Okay, so what makes this one more advanced than the last one? For a second, I'm going to go back to the code editor because this is probably the easiest way to explain this. So let me hop into this folder here and just really quickly talk through what I've done. So what I've done is I've set up this little folder here called Playground. Inside of the Playground, though, it has context on the rest of the code base. So this is my entire code base, right? And basically what that means is it can understand what the code base looks like today, and specifically, really critically, it can understand what the components are that already exist. So rather than me re-implementing everything from scratch, I am using the components that are already in my code base to implement the Figma design. And what this is going to do is have a completely different result in terms of the actual code. The UI might look the same to us, like just visually, but the code underneath is going to be completely different because it's going to reuse the components versus writing components from scratch. And so at this point in time, if we get this to work, then actually, yeah, this is useful to our engineering team because we basically implemented a functional prototype that they could then hand off to their coding agent. So they, they're going to be using Claude Code or cursors or something like that to do their implementation work and say like, take this code and implement it into the product. Of course, it's only the front end side, right? So they'd still have to wire up the back end, whatever the actual feature is, all that kind of stuff. but it can accelerate on the front end side in terms of the implementation. And then again, on like the design side or the product side, you can put the time and effort into getting it to be exactly what you want and then just hand it to them versus that old workflow where like they get 80% of the way there and you kind of give up because they have other stuff to move on to. So you can do it, you can kind of front load the work yourself a little bit to get precisely what you want and then hand off to them and then they can just take it and implement it directly. So we're going to hop over to the non-code view because it's a little bit easier. We're going to basically do the same thing. So we're going to go back to Figma for a moment. I'm going to click on this, grab the example prompt, go back over into Claude Code. I'm just going to paste the same thing. So really critically here, I want to make this like clear before I hit enter here. I did not change the prompt at all. I didn't like, I'm not changing anything about how I'm talking to it. What I'm changing is the context. So what information is inside of the project that I'm submitting it to, and I'm giving it access to all of the components before I submit this request. And the only thing I think I'm going to tell it in addition to this is use my existing components. And that should be it. So you can see that it's not really like a complexity in terms of prompting. I think a lot of people, especially like on the internet, maybe not so much anymore, but in the past, there's like a lot of prompting best practices, right? Like if you put in the perfect prompt, you're going to get the perfect result or whatever. I am very much a proponent of like the prompt almost doesn't matter. And what matters so much more is the context. So like what are you surrounding it with, right? And so you can see in this case, like I'm giving it a very basic prompt, but it has all of the context from Figma. It has all the context from my existing code base or my existing components. And then it's going to do its best to implement that the way that we want it to implement it. All right, so again, this is going to take a minute. I'm going to scroll through. I'm just going to start at the bottom again for questions, and then I'm going to work my way back up. Okay, so one question, can you explain again where you place the context? Yeah, actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this one visually because it's a bit technical and I feel like it's not going to be super easy for me to show you in the file system. So I'm just going to try to show you the difference of what I did. So in the first project, the basic one, what I had in there was basically nothing. You saw it said hello world, right? So it said hello world, and there was nothing inside this project. It literally was just text on a page. So we took the Figma, context, the MCP server, we dropped it on top. And what it did is it wrote its own components. And we're just going to pretend these little blue boxes are components for a second. It wrote its own components for all the various elements that you saw. So it wrote a new card component, it wrote a new header component, it wrote new, whatever, like all the various components that we need to implement that dashboard that we had. On the advanced side, what we did is I had set up ahead of time a folder that already contained all of my components. And we'll just make these ones green. So they're our code, all of my components from my code base. So these are my real components. Again, they were just sitting in the folder. They weren't being used at all, but they existed inside that folder. And so when I ask Claude Code to implement it, and I say use my existing components, rather than creating all these new ones, it's looking at my existing UI components from my code and using those to implement the design. And the difference here is, so let's say this is, I'm going to use the card example. So we have this existing card component, right? That our engineers already know about, they already know how to use, and really importantly, it's used all over our code base. And this side, we're going to reuse that card component, right? And so when we hand off the code to the engineer, they're going to be able to just see, oh yeah, this is my existing card component. I know what to do with this, and they're just going to be able to implement it. On this other side, what we would have done is, I'm just going to call it like new card. We would have invented a brand new implementation of that card that has like our engineers know nothing about, that is not ever used in our code base before. And basically what our engineer would have to do is somehow convert this over to this, right? They'd have to do the work of converting whatever work you did in your prototype to the actual code that you're supposed to be using in the code base. So that's the main difference. Again, it's just kind of like how we set up the project or the context. It's not the actual prompt itself. Okay, let me grab a couple more questions here. Yep, there'll be a recording afterwards for sure. And then, yeah, how was it that I put the code in the project folder? So again, this is a little bit of a technical question, to be honest. I'm using a design system from IBM called Carbon. So I literally just downloaded the design system and put it inside the folder. At your work, the answer to this question is going to be like TBD, depending on how stuff is set up. So like there's lots of different ways it could happen. Like for example, maybe you have Storybook, right? And so you just bring the Storybook into that folder, and then you're good to go because it has all your components. right? Or maybe you don't have Storybook and you just have like literally a list of components in your code base somewhere. What you'd want to do is take those components out of your production code base and put them on a folder on your computer, and then so you can kind of play with them that way. So it just depends, to be honest. But there's kind of different setups depending on what you have at work. For me, yeah, Carbon, just to be really clear, Carbon is just a design system from IBM. And the reason I used it is just it's just an example design system that is well documented. I don't particularly like it. There's nothing special about it. It's literally just an existing design system so that I'm not like making this up from scratch and I'm kind of pretending that it works. I'm using a real design system from a real company to do this, so that it mimics how you guys would do this at work as well. Um, Cool. All right. Couple more questions. So how does that folder look like? Maybe a dumb question. Yeah, so what you would have is again like literally just a list of all the components in the folder, and it's code. It's not like a text file, right? So it'd be like card.tsx or whatever. And it's all of the code for existing components. And then you'd have a basic folder structure that runs your application. And again, some of this is a bit technical, and I can't get through like all of it in 30 minutes. So that's what the course is for. It's to go through some of these technical details. But yeah. A couple more questions here I'll grab. Is any of this possible if you don't have access to your product's code base? Yeah, great question. So this is where you probably partner with your engineering team a little bit, and you basically just ask them to hand you or like export the front end components. And it's really not a big ask. It might sound hard, but it's really not. So they would just put that in its own kind of like GitHub repository for you, or they could literally, I don't know, email it to you, like whatever works best. And then you download those files to your computer and just put them in a folder. So you don't actually like, I'm not suggesting by the way that like you do this on your actual production application. Like you should be prototyping on top of it because you're probably going to make a mess. What I'm suggesting is that you take out the UI elements and you bring them into their own kind of folder, and then you prototype on top of that folder, basically. And yeah, when I say folder, I mean on my machine that Claude has access to. Because for Claude Code runs on your machine, right? That's a little bit different from like like a Bolt or a Lovable or those types of tools where they're running in the cloud. Claude Code runs on your machine. Yeah. Cool. One other question, which I kind of actually like, which is what is the main takeaway for us here? So the main takeaway, I think, and I'm not quite done yet. I probably have 3 more minutes. I'll go a little bit over if you guys can. The main takeaway generally is just that like you absolutely can prototype and get things to match with your existing design system. It's not that hard. You don't have to feel like you're pasting stuff into these tools and like it's not doing good enough or it's not close or whatever. There's a little bit to learn, right? But hopefully this showed you like with one prompt, you can get something that looks like your Figma design. And then secondly, you can actually like do a very good job of handing off to your engineering team by using these tools. It's not just about the fidelity of the design in terms of like what you see in the UI. It's also about the fidelity of the code. Like, are we handing the engineers something that's useful to them or not? And so this kind of second advanced example is that it is us producing something that is actually useful to our engineering team. And just to show you really quick, I'll kind of scroll this back over. So this is our advanced implementation. And this is the one that uses the real components, right? And you'll notice that there are some differences. Like this little guy here, the tabs have a blue bar underneath. That wasn't in the last one because it's using the actual tab component that exists from this design system, right? So again, very similar, obviously, in terms of what you're seeing. That's the goal. It shouldn't look that different, but very different in terms of the actual underlying code. Cool. I think I'm probably going to pause here in terms of presentations. So if anyone has questions, obviously I'm going to do my best to get through the remainder, if you guys can stick around. But does anyone want to come off of mute and ask a question while we have a couple minutes? I prefer chatting with you guys if you have a question, and then if not, I'll just kind of read them out loud and continue down the list here. Oh yeah, Greg, go for it.
Hey, Colin, thanks. This is super helpful. Question in addition to components, what about user flows and just page patterns and whatnot? How well can Claude pick those up?
Yeah, so do you mean like you want to paste in like maybe multiple different frames to get like a whole workflow done or something like that?
That's right. Yeah, interaction design as well.
Yep. Yeah, so you can kind of paste in, I would recommend like doing the first one just to get everything kind of set up by itself. And then after that, you can just keep posting more basically. So you can put in like 3 or 4 at a time, 4 frames, and say like, why are these up, in order or whatever.
Hmm. I guess more specifically, if those are described in the design system, can Claude kind of infer what those are and use them?
Yeah, it's just a matter of getting the context in, I guess, right? So when we say like defined in the design system, it depends on what that means. If it's like text-based, then like it's gonna be easy. If it's like Figma design systems with all the variables and stuff, then it's a little bit harder to get that into Claude Code. So yeah, it just depends on how it's defined. Cool. Any other questions? I do have one thing to wrap up with before we actually no, I'm gonna do that first, and then Katie, I'll take your question afterwards if that's okay.
I
Um,
call it.
cool. Yeah, just one second here. So as mentioned, let me share my screen again. So yeah, I'm running this course, AI prototyping for product managers. If you're a designer, you can obviously attend as well. It basically just covers prototyping workflows. But yeah, so as mentioned, I've been running this for a while. I post super regularly on these topics. I actually just did a breakdown of like every method of converting designs to code, and I went through like way more workflows than what I covered here recently on my Substack. But if you're interested in the course, then you can check it out. And there's also a discount code. So the code here, I'll just paste it in the chat, is LL350 for Lightning Lesson 350, and you get $350 off for the next 3 days or so. So yeah, definitely check that out. Right now, there's a good amount of people enrolled. We have PMs from like Google in the current cohort. I think someone from Atlassian as well. But like every kind of company you can think of has attended the course at some point in time. So yeah. Anyway, Katie, go ahead with your question.
Hi, Colin. I just have a question regarding the other NCPs of the design system, like ShatCN and other. And can we run parallelly different NCPs? Design example, we have a NCP of ShatCN, which can be added in the Figma, and then code and adding in the skill level, telling the hey, this is the design system. These are the
Yep.
NCPs, and then code based on those and the models, whatever the buttons and the everything over there, so
Yeah,
we
yeah,
can
you
do
got it.
that,
I'll
right?
just kind of reiterate what you're saying so everyone understands, but the short answer is yes, you can do that. So what the question here was like, if I have another MCP server that has basically instructions or definitions on my design system, which is something that teams are starting to do, right? So like you'd actually set up another MCP server that just tells your Claude Code about like, your different components or your different styles and so on. Can you use that in combination with the Figma one? So basically, can you use two MCP servers at the same time? And then the short answer is yes. The best way to do it is what you mentioned. So you'd set up a skill, and the skill is a prompt that everyone on your team can use kind of repeatedly. And it would say like, first get the context from Figma, then call our, ShadCN MCP server, convert the Figma components to ShadCN components in terms of like the mapping, and then implement the design. And that's pretty much it.
Okay, one last question. How can we, make less burning out of the tokens when we have this? That's the more important. So, what's the trick? Or
Sure.
there might be a trick, or where reuse of token can be helping. As we run a prompt, every time there is always a token that's burned a lot. So, is there a
Yes.
way where to do
Yeah.
this in a better
So
way?
generally the best way to save tokens is to actually like have stuff stored on your local machine instead of constantly calling MCP servers. So a good example of this is the sorry, give me one second here. A good example of this is like ShadCN. So rather than having an MCP server that exposes ShadCN, right? Just have the ShadCN components stored in the folder. And it's a lot easier for Claude to like go and look at the context or basically look at those components and use them rather than constantly calling the MCP server. MCP servers generally introduce a lot of like bloat in context usage or token usage. So you want to try to minimize the number of MCP servers you can, if you can. And one way to do that is just like bring everything you can onto your computer rather than having it connect through MCP. But yeah. And
Great,
yeah, the
thank you.
discount code was LL30 350, sorry. Yeah, Katie, go ahead with your question.
Hi, thank Colin for the lightning lesson. My question is sort of related to Amit's, which is best practices, resources, cheat sheets for those of us who don't work for Microsoft or Google and don't have a design system on the par of a material or a carbon. Like, how can we clean up, optimize, restructure? Out
Sure.
skill our design system so that it plays nicely with the MCP.
Yeah, so generally speaking, like when you take something from Figma and you bring it over to the MCP server, again, like Claude Code's job is to basically translate that Figma design to code, right? So if you don't have, a massive design system that's implemented like Google or whatever, what I would say is like just talk to your engineering team and say like, what do we have implemented on the front end? Like, what are the components that I can borrow? Put them in a folder, and then just basically target that folder when you're using Claude Code. You don't have to have like a complex design system because Claude Code will basically read through the components that you have and decide which ones are relevant to use based on the Figma design, right? So it's going to do like a double check first. The complexity of the design system doesn't like result in better quality designs. I don't think it's just that you have the components already built, like you have the code already there. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we're probably somewhere in the middle of that maturity scale.
Sure.
Like, I had heard that putting in like proper usage guidelines and clarifying, because a design system can leave so much to interpretation, right? Like, in what situation do I use a modal? In what situation do I use this type of select? And what, so like instructing somehow, because these are things that human designers usually
Yeah.
have to pick up over the years, right, at a
Right.
company. So how can we codify that in the system?
Yes, that's a great use case for a skill. And I'll just quickly show you. I'm gonna have to hop back into the code editor, unfortunately, because that's where it lives. But let me share my screen. So let me just open up like I have this skill here, right, inside of the Carbon Figma guide. So this is a skill specifically built on how do I use the Carbon design system when I'm getting the information from Figma that I built. And so the skill itself is a text document that basically just describes like, okay, how do we get context out of Figma? And then down below, it talks a little bit about, sorry, let me scroll a bit further. So like when should I be using which component? So this is a mapping of like the Figma elements to the code so that it does a really good job of picking the right elements. So this is not quite what you're saying, but an example of like me providing instructions that are very detailed on like when you see this thing in Figma, you should be using this component from the code base. So very similarly, what you could do is you could say in these types of situations, you should be using a modal or you should be using whatever, and it is just text. And then the way that you use this skill is, let me just clear this out really quick, is you literally just do slash and you use it as like a command and it automatically kind of injects everything that you have documented on the skill. So yeah, I mean, skills are generally super useful because it allows you to document and kind of like codify some context you want to give to your AI agent and then also share that across your team. So you can give them the files basically and they can use the same skill. And just as an example, like I have a skill that I use for helping me write blog posts. And one of the things it does is it connects to Gemini's image model and it will automatically write prompts for the image model for me and then send them off. So I'll basically like give it an outline for a post. It'll flush out the outline a bit, but it'll also generate like six different images for me for different sections. And so that's a skill that I built that basically knows the workflow that I have so that it goes and builds the images for me and does the whole thing, and then I can go and clean it all up afterwards. But it saves me from like going into Gemini and like manually prompting, "Hey, make a picture for this, make a picture for this," because it's part of the skill. Yeah, cool. All right, this is probably good in terms of time, so I'm gonna probably wrap up here. I do have other Lightning lessons if you guys are interested in those, so I'll just grab my general Maven link. This will just kind of list everything that I'm currently doing. And you can check that out. If you just scroll down, you'll see lightning lessons, and I'm adding more as well, so you can always check back whenever you want. And then, yeah, last thing I'll mention again is just the course. So if you guys are interested in the course, you can check it out. Obviously, if you have questions, feel free to send me an email, and I'll follow up with the discount code as well, just in case you forget it over the next couple of days or anything like that. But yeah, thanks everyone, and hopefully see you at the next one. Thank you.